สียงโอ้โหโอเคงั้นเดี๋ยวรอเวลาใช่ไหมครับ
ค่ะ
โอเคครับ
ขอบคุณมากค่ะ สวัสดีค่ะขอต้อนรับทุกท่านกลับเข้าสู่การประชุมวิชาการการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพประจำปี 2564 ในวันที่ 3 ซึ่งเป็นวันสุดท้ายของการประชุมในปีนี้นะคะโดยในช่วงที่ 3 New Global Governance of International Trade and Health จะเป็นการร่วมแลกเปลี่ยนว่าหลังจากที่ต้องเผชิญกับการแพร่ระบาดของโควิด -19 นั้นองค์กรต่างๆทั้งที่เกี่ยวข้องกับด้านการค้าและสุขภาพทั้งระดับนานาชาติและระดับชาติควรมีการเตรียมการหรือปรับตัวอย่างไรค่ะโดยในวันนี้หลังจากจบการอภิปรายในช่วงที่ 3 จะมีการสรุปประเด็นสำคัญและข้อเสนอแนะที่ได้จากการประชุมตลอด 3 วันที่ผ่านมาด้วยค่ะอย่างไรก็ดีก่อนที่จะเข้าสู่เนื้อหาของการประชุมในวันนี้แผนงานการพัฒนาศักยภาพด้านการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพหรือ ITH ขอใช้โอกาสนี้เป็นการเปิดตัวหนังสือที่เราอยู่ระหว่างดำเนินการจัดทำและใกล้ที่จะเผยแพร่สู่สาธารณะแล้วนะคะหนังสือเล่มนี้มีชื่อว่าการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพค่ะในช่วงนี้ดิฉันขอเชิญทุกท่านพบกับคุณมินตราหงส์ธำรงจากแผนงาน ITH ค่ะ
สวัสดีค่ะเรียนท่านผู้มีเกียรติทุกท่านดิฉันในนามของแผนงานการพัฒนาศักยภาพด้านการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพหรือ ITS ขอใช้เวลาสั้นๆในการนำเสนอหนังสือเรื่องการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพนะคะซึ่งแผนงาน ITS เนี่ยค่ะกำลังจัดทำอยู่ค่ะเรื่องของการค้าระหว่างประเทศนะคะมีวิวัฒนาการมาอย่างยาวนานมีความเกี่ยวข้องกับสุขภาพอย่างหลีกเลี่ยงไม่ได้การค้าทำให้เกิดการไหลเวียนของสินค้าบริการผู้คนซึ่งเป็นทั้งผู้ซื้อและผู้ขายมีการค้าการลงทุนข้ามพรมแดนสิ่งเหล่านี้ทำให้ผู้บริโภคมีทางเลือกมากขึ้นแต่การดำเนินการดังกล่าวนะคะอาจนำมาส่งผลกระทบต่อสุขภาพอย่างเช่นการแพร่ระบาดของโรคติดต่อข้ามพรมแดนและการบริโภคสินค้าที่ไม่ดีต่อสุขภาพอันเป็นผลมาจากการโฆษณาค่ะในขณะเดียวกันประเด็นด้านสุขภาพเช่นภาวะฉุกเฉินด้านสาธารณสุขนะคะก็มีผลกระทบต่อการค้าระหว่างประเทศด้วยเช่นเดียวกันดังจะเห็นได้จากกรณีของการแพร่ระบาดของเชื้อไวรัสโควิด -19 ค่ะเนื่องจากในขณะนี้นะคะยังไม่ได้มีการรวบรวมหนังสือที่เป็นข้อมูลภาพรวมทางด้านการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพเอาไว้ว่ามีความเกี่ยวข้องหรือเชื่อมโยงกันอย่างไรทางแผนงานนะคะจึงได้มีการจัดทำหนังสือเล่มนี้ขึ้นมาเพื่อเป็นแหล่งข้อมูลเบื้องต้นให้กับบุคคลทั่วไปที่สนใจเราได้จัดทำในเวอร์ชันภาษาไทยนะคะเนื่องจากในขณะนี้หนังสือด้านการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพฉบับภาษาอังกฤษนั้นมีค่อนข้างหลากหลายแล้วค่ะในหนังสือเล่มนี้นะคะต้องการให้ผู้อ่านนะคะได้เห็นถึงความเชื่อมโยงของทั้งสองส่วนก็คือด้านการค้าและด้านสุขภาพเพื่อให้ผู้อ่านนะคะซึ่งเป็นบุคคลทั่วไปได้เข้าใจว่าเรื่องการค้าระหว่างประเทศนั้นไม่ได้เป็นเรื่องไกลตัวเลยค่ะโดยหนังสือเรื่องนี้นะคะจะครอบคลุมเนื้อหาที่ชี้ให้เห็นว่าประเด็นด้านการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพนั้นเกี่ยวข้องกันอย่างไรซึ่งเนื้อหาในหนังสือนะคะก็จะประกอบไปด้วยการทั้งหมด6บทนะคะบทที่1ก็จะได้แก่เรื่องการค้าระหว่างประเทศและภัยคุกคามด้านสุขภาพซึ่งภัยคุกคามด้านสุขภาพก็ยกตัวอย่างเช่นการเกิดโรคติดต่ออุบัติใหม่การเกิดโรคติดต่ออุบัติซ้ำเช่นโควิด -19 ซึ่งส่งผลกระทบต่อการค้าระหว่างประเทศอย่างไรและผลกระทบจากการค้าระหว่างประเทศนี้ย้อนกลับมาเป็นผลกระทบต่อสุขภาพอย่างไรด้วยค่ะบทที่2จะนำเสนอในหัวข้อของการค้าระหว่างประเทศด้านการบริการสุขภาพซึ่งเกี่ยวข้องกับการเคลื่อนย้ายของบริการทางการแพทย์ข้ามพรมแดนการเคลื่อนย้ายของผู้รับบริการหรือผู้ป่วยต่างชาติการเคลื่อนย้ายของการลงทุนและการเคลื่อนย้ายของผู้ให้บริการอย่างเช่นแพทย์พยาบาลนะคะในบทที่3จะนำเสนอในเรื่องของการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสิ่งแวดล้อมซึ่งเป็นประเด็นที่มีความสำคัญเป็นอย่างมากและเป็นประเด็นที่ควรต้องมีการแก้ไขโดยการค้าระหว่างประเทศนะคะได้ส่งให้เกิดการขยายตัวด้านการผลิตการบริโภคสินค้าและบริการซึ่งมันจะเป็นปัจจัยหนึ่งที่ก่อให้เกิดปัญหาด้านสิ่งแวดล้อมเช่นปัญหาด้านการเปลี่ยนแปลงสภาพภูมิอากาศปัญหาการเคลื่อนย้ายขยะระหว่างประเทศแต่ในทางตรงกันข้ามเรื่องของการค้าระหว่างประเทศนั้นก็มีกลไกที่ช่วยสนับสนุนเพื่อลดปัญหาสิ่งแวดล้อมด้วยเช่นเดียวกันค่ะ ในบทที่4นะคะจะนำเสนอในเรื่องของการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสินค้าที่เกี่ยวข้องกับสุขภาพอาทิเช่นอาหารยาเครื่องมือแพทย์เครื่องดื่มแอลกอฮอล์ยาสูบซึ่งมีประเด็นท้าทายทางด้านสุขภาพหลากหลายประเด็นนะคะไม่ว่าจะเป็นในเรื่องของกฎระเบียบที่เกี่ยวข้องเรื่องของตัวสินค้าเองก็ด้วยนะคะในบทที่5นะคะจะนำเสนอในเรื่องการค้าระหว่างประเทศกับความเป็นธรรมทางด้านสุขภาพค่ะโดยเราจะกล่าวถึงความตกลงด้านการค้าและระบบทางด้านทรัพย์สินทางปัญญาค่ะที่ทำให้เกิดความไม่เป็นธรรมทางด้านสุขภาพขึ้นและที่สำคัญที่สุดในบทสุดท้ายของหนังสือเล่มนี้นะคะจะพูดถึงความสอดคล้องของนโยบายและแนวคิดด้านการค้าและด้านสุขภาพซึ่งเป็นหัวข้อที่สำคัญที่ควรจะทำความเข้าใจและสนับสนุนให้เกิดความสอดคล้องดังกล่าวนี้ขึ้นได้อันเนื่องจากการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพนั้นไม่ใช่สิ่งที่แยกขาดจากกันได้โดยเด็ดขาดนะคะแต่มีมิติที่เชื่อมโยงกันอย่างเป็นพลวัตทั้งการเคลื่อนไหวการปรับตัวการเปลี่ยนแปลงไปพร้อมๆกันอยู่เสมอและการดำเนินนโยบายของทั้งสองภาคส่วนควรมีความสอดคล้องและคำนึงถึงผลเสียและผลลัพธ์โดยยึดถือการปกป้องสุขภาพของประชาชนเป็นหลักการสำคัญค่ะโดยหนังสือที่เราได้กล่าวถึงนี้นะคะจะได้มีการอัปโหลดลงทางเผยแพร่ทางเว็บไซต์ของแผนงาน ITS ค่ะและจะดาวน์โหลดให้กับทุกท่านและบุคคลทั่วไปได้ดาวน์โหลดได้ผ่านทางเว็บไซต์ในเร็วๆนี้ค่ะขอบคุณค่ะ
ค่ะ ขอบคุณคุณมินตราเป็นอย่างสูงนะคะและในลำดับถัดไปค่ะขอเชิญทุกท่านเข้าสู่ช่วงที่3ของการประชุมวิชาการการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพในหัวข้อ New Global Governance of International Trade and Health ค่ะและขอเชิญพบกับดร.นายแพทย์ทักษพลธรรมรังสีผู้ดำเนินรายการค่ะ
สวัสดีครับ น้องอุ๋ยครับ Thank you very much. This is my great honor to serve you as a moderator for this conference and in particularly this very important session. We are talking about the 3 keywords here. We are talking about global governance, international trade and health, and thirdly, new. Why new? I think the COVID-19 pandemic has sent a shock wave to all, to everyone, every single walk of life, and to every structure, from sub-local level, from individual to family, up to the global one. We can say that during this pandemic, what is next? We have the word new normal, and someone said now normal and next normal. These 3 normal has to be the linkage to somehow. But welcome to VUCA world, the world before and after the COVID-19. The world never be the same as it previously. We have seen the VUCA world. VUCA come from volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So it is much challenging in terms of how low and middle income country can prepare for what's next, because what's next is not clear. We are not 100% sure, and this is not uniformly arranged on impact of COVID-19. And what's next? This is X. Would it accelerate the trend, the previous trend before the COVID-19? We have many mega trends, be it demographic, be it aging, NCD rising, climate change, how it affect this trend? Or would it reverse the trend? We have seen the rise of priority given to health. I would say that never before that health has been recognized as one of the key security issue, has been recognized as human right issue. Now, right, responsible, and protection, they are key. So for this session, we have 3 key speakers. It is our great opportunity to listen to these three with experience from different perspective. We will have different of the government from Dr. Nakorn Premsi, who is the director of the National Vaccine Institute from Thailand. Then we will have the perspective from intergovernmental organization or international agency, like from Mr. Roger Kemp from World Trade Organization. And then we have non-state actor perspective from academic, from Associate Professor Deborah Gleason from the School of Psychology and Public Health, La Trobe University, Australia. So these three different perspectives will guide us to how low and middle income country should prepare for the new normal, the new form, the new arrangement, new function, and new structure of global governance. We will talk about the WHO, of course, which is one of the key actors at global health level, WTO. We talk about one of the very outstanding issue for us is the vaccine. We have seen the roller coaster situation of vaccine, up and down, and a lot of many issues. Talk about efficiency, trust given to vaccine. We're talking about nationalism. We talk about the provision, capacity of the infrastructure for the vaccine rollout. And we should talk about paradigm shift for the future. And as a citizenship, everyone be member of this global community. How we prepare and how we participate in this global governance. So we have 15 minutes for each of our three distinguished speaker. I have to. The organizer asked me to inform all of us here is that please, if you want to participate, you can chat. You can use the chat box, or we will have a Q&A session after this session. And okay, so let's start from the first speaker, Roger Kemp. Sorry if I pronounce your family names wrongly. Please correct me if I'm wrong. The Intellectual Property, Government, Procurement, and Competition Division, World Trade Organization. Organizer, please put Roger short bio in the chat box, so let's our participant see his very experienced post in the past and his current role here. Roger, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Atamarangsi, for the introduction, and you pronounce my name well in English. Although being a German, no Germans would say Roger, so that's, but I'm used to it in the international context. Just before I start my presentation, I think it's an interesting way of introducing it when you asked what is the new normal. Frankly, I don't have the answer to this because everything seems to be in movings of right now, and especially for us, and this is why I also wanted to apologize if I'm not always very clear, because I'm tired preparing the sort of ministerial conference at the WTO next week. And as you know, one of the centerpieces there is the adoption not only of a political declaration of the WTO sort of response to the pandemic, but also the question how to deal with the TRIPS waiver, a proposal which is still on the table and not settled. But for sure, one thing I think which has emerged from this pandemic is the huge importance of collaboration, not only between international organizations, but across all levels. So let me just share my screen now, if that's possible. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can see, Roger.
Okay, very good. So I thought as a representative of the WTO, it would be useful to start with a very sort of short overview on the impact of the pandemic on global trade in general, and then also on trade in medical goods. And what we can actually see from the latest data we have published in October, that indeed soft global trade has increased in the course of this year. We expect something like close to 11% and another close to 5% next year, after a drop of more than 5% in 2020. So what we see in all of this, although there is trade soft growth, there's a disparity in terms of the regions. And I've given you here a comparative table between comparing the situation in the first quarter of 2019 to what we estimate being the figures for the last quarter next year. And you see actually that the region, your region, Asia, is doing best in all of this in terms of increase of exports and imports. You see the green line at the bottom of this table, whereas some other regions, in particular Africa and the Middle East, are not doing very well in terms of catching up. So, of course, these data are subject to what we think is one of the biggest threats right now to make those estimates. That is, as we all experience now, new infection waves, which may indeed undermine the recovery. And I think here in Europe, we are probably most exposed to this at this point in time. The next graph just visualizes what I said before. The dark blue line on top is Asia, so the highest increase in terms of exports and imports. These are data, by the way, I should mention this, they are not yet published. They will soon go on our webpage. So these are the most recent information resources we can offer. And then if you turn to trade in medical goods, just a few words about this. What you see actually, compared to the drop in general in 2020, we actually saw a 16% growth of trade in medical goods. And also for the first half of this year, we see a continuing growth of trade in medical goods. So that is one thing. It's also noteworthy that the share of medical goods in trade is steadily increasing. So we had an increase of 5.4% back in 2019 and something to around 6% in the first half of this year. And of course, this varies depending on the products, because if you look specifically into what are medical devices and face masks, the growth is actually much higher and turns around 30-35%. If you're interested, and I've embedded in my presentation hyperlinks, so for those who are interested in more data, if you click on this Secretariat information node, you will get directly to that node with much more details. The next slide is again a graphic illustration of what I was just saying in a few words. So on the right-hand side, you see the significant growth in trade in medical goods, about 16%, and a drop on the other fronts. So that, I think, is a nice illustration of how important trade is and was in times of a pandemic, trade in medical goods. The next slide is just, I'm not going through the details here, but it's just to highlight that from, I think, the very beginning of our DG taking office in March this year, she has been out there saying that one of the most important things is to keep international markets open, so that we can actually not only ensure equitable access to vaccines and other products, but also to ensure that there is economic recovery. And similar things, I think, transpired through an earlier joint statement with WHO. Again, if you're interested in details, you can access those through the link. Now, what has actually emerged from the discussions we've had all through the year in terms of challenges that arise from the COVID-19 pandemic? I think, first of all, much of our work has concentrated on identifying and addressing what are supply chain bottlenecks. So in other words, to ensure precisely the smooth flow of trade in medical and other goods. The second point is about the critical inputs for vaccine manufacturing, and I will come back to this as I talk about this WTO Secretariat analytical work which we have done. Of course, regulatory cooperation is a key issue and mentioned by any manufacturer as being one of the issues potentially at least delaying the delivery of any of the COVID-19 products. Transparency is another big issue, not only of measures taken by governments, including, for example, export restrictions, but also the production and delivery schedules. And this is where we are still struggling to bring the different things together so that we have a clear idea who is producing what at what time and who will receive what at what time, because that also needs preparation on the recipient end, and it needs the right delivery channels. And the other two soft transparency issues are donations. Why? Because yes, countries are donating, but they do this through different channels, bilaterally, through COVAX, and very often the schedule for those donations and also the volume is not really clear. So we struggle with transparency, which would enormously help to accelerate delivery of vaccines to beneficiary countries. Of course, one of the big issues in all of this is the question of ramping up and diversifying manufacturing capacities. You've heard about this all over the place, and very closely linked to this, the question of enabling transfer of technology and know-how. So the next two slides, I will just leave it with the text as is for somebody who's interested to read this. What I wanted to highlight here, and this is why you see this in red, is actually a health ministers declaration, G20 health ministers, who speak about what is needed in terms of trade. Which is interesting, because I think it's an important, and somebody talked about no working in silos. I think today we are far away from this situation because trade and health ministers actually do speak to each other and do address each other's topics. And likewise, the G20 Rome Leaders Declaration of late October this year looked into many things which are directly relevant for the pandemic, starting with research and development, local production efforts, as well as the sort of increased access to vaccines and others. So these are just topical statements, if you want, which I wanted to bring to your attention. What I think is important, and I will sort of speak to this later, we have since June this year a task force which is composed of the leaders of the IMF, the World Bank Group, WHO and WTO, the so-called Multilateral Leaders Task Force. And they have set themselves a couple of objectives in terms of releasing doses to lower and middle income countries, to work on transparency, the issues I mentioned about delivery schedules, production schedules, to push towards elimination of export restrictions, which has been a big issue, especially for vaccine production in India and export from there. And also for regulatory streamlining and harmonization. So these are important issues which are discussed regularly at the level of the principles of those four organizations. And they have also sort of called for swaps. Now, what is swaps? That is just to basically swap the timing of your own delivery with somebody else who should go first. And if you want one very recent example, 2 days ago, Switzerland actually agreed with Moderna to go back in the line so that Moderna can deliver, I think, about 1 million doses first to COVAX before they then deliver to Switzerland. So that is swapping, and it starts happening now for the benefit of those countries who are most in need of vaccines. Now, a few words about what we have done at the WTO. So we have a lot of focus on transparency, either through monitoring reports, which have shown that trade indeed has been a force for good by enabling access to medical supplies, but also by monitoring measures which are taken by governments in all three areas: goods, services, and intellectual property. We have spent a lot of effort on analytical work, and that includes a long list which you can see here, but these are just the most recent publications. An indicative list of trade bottlenecks and trade facilitating measures. And that is basically a compilation of what we also sort of gathered from private sector representatives, where are the sort of choke points in their supply chains, be it the final products, be it the inputs needed for the production. You have something very important, and an indicative list of critical COVID-19 vaccine inputs. Why is it so important? Because the HSS code, which is run by the World Customs Organization, is simply not detailed enough. So this is actually a list which provides much more detailed information to customs so that they know which products are needed, for example, for the production of COVID-19 vaccines, and which then can perhaps go into green channels in terms of customs clearance. We have a recent publication on tariffs on vaccine inputs, which again shows that some developing countries in particular are still applying very high tariffs to imports, something in the range of 20 to 25%, which of course makes the production of anything much higher in the next step. And we have something as recent as Monday this week, and I would really invite you to look at this, the vaccine trade tracker, which WTO and the IMF have put together, and which shows actually the trade flows in vaccines. So who's importing, who's exporting, the quantities, who's getting the vaccines. So it's a very important information resource. And finally, the WTO Secretariat has also briefed members on licensing and technology transfer agreements. Now, if you're interested, there's a sort of catch-all hyperlink at the end, the COVID-19 webpage, where you find all of this and much more information. Just a few words about the licensing and technology transfer agreements. I think this slide is actually very telling in terms of what is happening. It's very dynamic. I mean, this dates of, I think, late October. So by now, probably the graph on top of this would have changed again. But you see a huge number actually of agreements, either in green, which include technology transfer, or in blue, which are contract production agreements. Now, the latter, the contract production agreements, are essentially located in Europe and the US. Why is that so? Because these are the major production places. But then you see also a number of green spots on the world map. And these are the places where technology transfer indeed does take place, so that manufacturers in those countries and regions can also manufacture the vaccines. Another slide, just a few words here, which we have taken from Affinity. You probably know Affinity as a sort of huge data provider. And what is actually interesting in this slide is the message that the share of contracted production is rising steadily since the beginning of the year, because we started off with something like 19% of contracted production versus 81% in-house production. And this has increased, so contracted production has increased to something like 25% at this point in time. And then I come to the final part of my presentation, and this is about our engagement in collaboration with other international organizations and key stakeholders. What we have done is actually organize a series of high-level events, essentially focusing on vaccine equity, on issues which are arising in the supply chain, including regulatory issues. And we have also had a high-level dialogue organized together with WHO colleagues in July on the expansion of COVID-19 vaccine manufacturing, so that everything basically oriented towards ensuring equitable access. Now, since June, and I mentioned this before, we have also something new, which is called the Multilateral Leaders Task Force, and which brings together the four organizations you see here on the screen, so IMF, World Bank, WHO, and WTO. And what is interesting, in addition to meeting regularly at the level of principles, this outfit has also organized private high-level consultations with vaccine manufacturer CEOs. And we've done this twice now, in September and earlier this month. And why do we do this? This is a very soft direct engagement with the CEOs of the manufacturers in order to see what soft challenges they are facing, what are the delivery issues, and what are their forecasts in terms of production for next year. And we have replicated this cooperation also at a technical level. So we have a more regular get together in what is called a vaccine network, where the plus ones of the CEOs and us meet and discuss really the technical details. In addition to this, the WTO Secretariat has played a role and has been involved in the ACT Accelerator Vaccine Manufacturing Working Group, which you can actually see if you look at their report to the G20 meeting in October. That includes importance of contributions from the WTO. So this is a very close hand-in-hand working. Now, ACT-A has, I think, a very important role to play in terms of political support for what we are doing. So we very much appreciate the cooperation with them, as we do with the COVAX work streams and leadership teams. Now, one of the COVAX work streams is precisely about the free flow of goods, so one of the core areas of our competence, and we were in a position to bring our expertise to the table of this particular work stream. And then, of course, we have our regular World Trade Report, and again, the link is there. I just took one of the headlines from this report, which I think is sending the right message. International cooperation on trade policies can actually help to cope with shocks like the current pandemic. And moderator, if I still have 5 minutes, is that okay, or am I over?
Yep.
And then I'll come to an end. Just this slide, I don't think I need to spend much time on it. It just gives you in graphic form an idea of the kind of collaborations we as the WTO have in place with other international organizations, but also the cooperation which takes place between, say, WIPO and other international organizations, the World Bank, and so on. So for those who are interested in who's working with whom, that gives you actually at least a superficial idea. Something I should, of course, always mention when I speak to this issue is the very well-established cooperation with colleagues from WHO and WIPO. Sorry. This is a long-standing cooperation. Sorry, I'm losing my voice. Which is in place for more than 10 years by now. And the big advantage of this cooperation is actually that we each bring our expertise to the table, and that helps take an integrated approach to what are the trade, health, and IP issues. What are the key products from this cooperation? Well, most recently, we have published an update of the trilateral study on access to medical technologies and innovation last year in July. And we also have a series of technical symposia. The next is most likely to take place in April 2022 on lessons learned from the pandemic. And we, of course, organize joint capacity building activities. Now, what is interesting, there's a joint DG statement of June this year, which called for an update of a COVID-19 information note, which was included in the trilateral study. And this update is actually in the public domain now. Again, if you click on the link, you get the update of late October, and which has on 20 pages, I think, a summary and overview of everything which has happened related to COVID-19, trade, health, and intellectual property. We are in the process of launching together a trilateral platform for technical assistance. So, for example, if in Thailand you're looking for technical assistance, you have a one-stop shop where to go to, and which automatically involves the three organizations to bring the best in terms of capacity building that we can offer to you. And finally, we have started a series of technical workshops, the first one in September on IP licensing technology and sharing of know-how and clinical trial information. So a lot of things going on at the trilateral level. And I should mention here, because this is about a bit about the global architecture, something we should not lose of sight, developments at the WHO in terms of a pandemic preparedness and response treaty. And as some of you may know, there's a special session of the World Health Assembly next week, which clashes actually with the WTO Ministerial Conference. And this special session is to decide whether or not to launch negotiations on an international instrument or other tool on sort of a pandemic response. Now, the working group on pandemic preparedness and response has adopted a report which includes a couple of recommendations for the special session. And the most important is to establish indeed an intergovernmental negotiating body, which would take care of negotiating an international instrument. And also the recommendation that the special session outlines a process which actually leads to the identification of elements to be covered by this instrument and the modalities of negotiations and timelines. Now, what is interesting from our perspective as the World Trade Organization, the elements which the working party or the working group has identified, the list includes actually issues which are directly trade related, such as research and development, intellectual property, transfer of technology, and of course the building up of local and regional manufacturing capacities. So in other words, what I'm saying here, we need to make sure that there are synergies between what is going to happen most likely if that decision is taken next week at the World Health Assembly special session, synergies between that negotiating process and what we hopefully will see as an outcome of MC12, the ministerial conference next week on our side. Last slide share. This is about the work on trade and health at the WTO. And that's just for those who are not familiar with this. We are working at this point in time today until the end of next week in two parallel strings. One is what is called a General Council facilitator process or consultations. Now, this is led by Ambassador Walker from New Zealand, and some of you may have seen comments about this process in the press. He's actually preparing a political declaration and a decision or an annex on a work plan or action plan for preparedness and resilience. So two pieces. The political declaration would look into issues such as export restrictions, trade facilitating measures, regulatory cooperation, etc. And then the action plan would set a time frame for dedicated work in terms of making the WTO and the membership much better prepared for future pandemics. So, and that action plan would actually have details in terms of what to do by the different WTO bodies. For example, there would be an action point which is under consideration on the role of the intellectual property system to support the development, manufacture, and distribution of needed technologies for future pandemics. In parallel, we have a discussion in the TRIPS Council on what is a proposal to waive certain obligations under the TRIPS agreement, and also a proposal from the European Union, which is more focused on clarifying and possibly waiving certain conditions, but in the section on compulsory licensing of the TRIPS agreement. This process is also ongoing as we are speaking. There will be, I think, intense meetings in the next couple of days. The facilitator process is a bit more advanced because we have a draft text which was circulated earlier this week. The TRIPS Council process at this stage, there are two proposals, but there's no text, joint text on which delegations are working. So, and yet both have to come to the ministerial conference next week. And what we are hopeful, and we are really crossing fingers, is that we manage to agree on an outcome of the TRIPS Council process, which would then feed into the facilitator consultations and into the political declaration and action plan for the future work of the WTO. And I'm happy to say more about this as we are entering the discussion. Facilitator, I will, sorry, moderator, I will just stop here with, I think, an image which looks familiar to you from the book publication you are looking into. And that is a bubble chart taken from the trilateral study. And essentially to underline what we need is indeed pulling together all the expertise. We need to work together. And with that, I think we have a good chance that we will handle this pandemic in a fairly decent way. Thank you so much, and sorry for overstepping the time.
Thank you very much, Roger. So this figure in front of everyone is showing how complex it is. But we never see the interconnectedness between health and trade like this before. I think this is so clear. I've never seen the head, the management of the top management of this international intergovernmental organization, be it the WHO, the WTO, IMF, the bank, WIPO, come together to discuss this interconnectedness. And we cannot be masked, as Roger said, rightly said, that we cannot be masked by aggregate level data. If you see the difference of level of trade, import, export, they are much different in terms of geographical and commercial product types. But I like the slide that Roger walked us through major challenges at the moment for supply chain, regulatory cooperation, coherence, transparency, and diversified manufacturing capacity, in which I believe that Dr. Nakorn will help addressing what is the real experience in our country, in Thailand. But with emerging solidarity, we have seen the many mechanisms, many initiatives to promote global solidarity, with COVAX, ACT-AIR, or many other. I think that it is also our challenge how to put this solidarity in terms of the action on the ground to save life, while also using the many new mechanisms, including I like very much the one-stop shop service between the WTO and WIPO. But let's see what the future will bring. Now, can we move to the second speaker from our list? Associate Professor Deborah Gleason from La Trobe University, Australia. She is very much experienced and has expertise in the linkage between international trade agreement and public health. Professor Deborah, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'll just put my slides up onto the screen.
Yep, we can see.
Great, thank you. So I'm Deborah Gleason from La Trobe University, and I've been studying trade agreements and public health for a little over a decade, with a particular focus on access to medicines and public health. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm giving this presentation, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm going to focus on some of the proposals that are circulating at the moment about how we might prepare better for pandemics in future, given the difficulties that we've encountered in the COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, there have been a lot of problems, particularly with access to COVID-19 vaccines and other medical products, which we spent some time talking about in session 2 yesterday. And some of the slides that I presented yesterday were about the vast inequities that we're seeing in access to COVID-19 vaccines, with now about 5.2% of people in low-income countries having received a dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, whereas the vaccination rates, of course, in many high-income countries are very high, where we've just ticked over the 90% mark, first dose mark in Australia recently, and looks like we'll be getting to well over 90% vaccinated in Australia. And of course, vaccination rates are high in many other high-income countries as well. So I'm going to talk about a couple of debates around circling around the WHO about strengthening the international health regulations and whether we need a pandemic treaty or not. These are issues that are not resolved yet, but there are ongoing discussions about, as Roger mentioned. What I won't talk about in detail in this presentation, though, is the importance of strengthening the funding for WHO and particularly increasing the assessed contributions so that WHO is properly resourced to do its work in this area. I think that's really important, but I won't have time to go into that in any detail. In terms of the WTO, I think Roger's given us a very comprehensive picture of what the WTO is doing. I'm going to focus specifically on the TRIPS waiver, which I talked at length about yesterday, and some of the other trade and health initiatives being discussed around the Ministerial Council. Again, I won't have time to go into this in detail, but I also think it's really important to improve the multilateralism, inclusivity and transparency around the WTO negotiations, and I'll touch on some of those issues as I talk about the TRIPS waiver and the other trade and health initiatives. And then finally, I'll speak about some ideas about what developing countries, including Thailand, can do to prepare for participating in some of these discussions in the global forums, and also domestically and regionally to prepare for pandemics. So first of all, there's been, I guess, a general sense that the international health regulations have only gone so far to helping us manage the COVID-19 pandemic. And these were last revised in 2005, and while they're our primary binding instrument to prevent the international spread of disease, in many ways they haven't been fit for purpose in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, and there are some sort of well-recognised weaknesses in the international health regulations that would need to be addressed if they're going to really serve us well for later pandemics. So while the international health regulations enable the World Health Organization to collect surveillance data and issue recommendations to control the spread of infectious diseases, and it also places obligations on states to develop and maintain certain minimum core public health capacities around surveillance, notification and reporting of infectious diseases, and also requires states to collaborate with each other and with the World Health Organization to implement the regulations, and it has specific provisions around notifying WHO of events that may constitute a public health emergency of international concern. Some of the weaknesses that have been noted about the international health regulations are its lack of dedicated funding, and in particular its mechanisms for compliance monitoring, so difficulties enforcing the commitments that countries make under the international health regulations. It also lacks a regulatory framework to prevent the transmission of pathogens from animals to humans, so the zoonotic spillover, which of course has been a big issue with the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been criticised for having insufficient nuance in the alert levels, that we need to have perhaps a more staged process rather than the sort of on-off mechanism of the public health emergency of international concern, the need for stronger measures around multi-sectoral collaboration and better measures to ensure equitable access to vaccines. So there's quite a bit of debate going on around whether the best way to deal with these issues is to revise the international health regulations or to negotiate a separate pandemic treaty, or in fact, whether we need to have both of those processes to adequately deal with the issues. So with a pandemic treaty, as Roger mentioned, there's a meeting next week, a special session of the World Health Assembly where there'll be a discussion of whether to launch negotiations towards a pandemic treaty. And this could be an opportunity to provide stronger enforcement measures around some of the issues that have been problematic during the COVID-19 pandemic. But there's also the risk that negotiating a pandemic treaty may take a long time, and that it might be better to actually tinker with the international health regulations that we already have, because that process might actually work a bit faster. Some of the civil society concerns around the debates about the pandemic treaty are whether it would actually improve access to pandemic-related medicines and vaccines. And I think those concerns are legitimate, because a lot of the countries that have been behind the move to push the negotiations for this pandemic treaty have been the countries that have been obstacles to moving towards the TRIPS waiver and actually getting agreement to free up intellectual property and enable ramping up the global supply of these products. And countries that have also been responsible for pre-purchasing a lot of the global supply of vaccines and other COVID-19 medical products, and have been reluctant to share and to force their pharmaceutical companies to share with the rest of the world. So there's a big question mark hanging over this process, and whether it would just result in another agreement that doesn't go far enough to address the real issues. There are also questions around how much low and middle income countries, and particularly low income countries, are able to participate in the negotiations, particularly during a pandemic when there are such barriers to travel and to sending significantly sized teams to participate in these types of negotiations, and also concerns around the role of the pharmaceutical industry because of the World Health Organization's FENSA arrangements. Would the pharmaceutical industry be too closely involved in this process, and would that actually prevent really meaningful commitments around improving access to medicines and vaccines? So that's some of the initiatives and discussions taking place at the WHO. Looking at the WTO, the TRIPS waiver, I think, is a really, really important initiative. And as I talked about yesterday, there is growing momentum towards agreement on the TRIPS waiver. It's now co-sponsored by 63 countries. It has more than 100 countries supporting it amongst the 164 members of the WTO. But a handful of wealthy countries are continuing to oppose the TRIPS waiver and to put forward alternatives. So particularly the EU, led by Germany, which is a strong opponent of the TRIPS waiver, but also the UK, Switzerland and Norway. So in a sense, the Ministerial Council meeting next week is a really kind of important turning point or moment for the TRIPS waiver. And I think that we may see some sort of compromise position emerging. But in my view, to be effective, the TRIPS waiver would need to be broadly conceived, similar to the proposal put forward by India and South Africa and revised in May this year, it would at a minimum need to waive Article 31 of the TRIPS agreement, which covers the use of the subject matter of a patent without authorization of the rights holder, and Article 39, really importantly, the protection of undisclosed data, which may be data that's in a regulatory dossier or data that's protected as trade secrets. It also needs to have broad scope in terms of covering all health products and technologies to prevent, treat and contain COVID-19, including not just vaccines, but also therapeutics, diagnostics devices and personal protective equipment, and also their materials and components and methods and means of manufacture. It's not sufficient just to have a waiver on the intellectual property rights on the final products, but also all along the supply chain to really make a difference in terms of companies being able to manufacture these products. So, of course, as well as the TRIPS waiver, we've seen a counter proposal by the European Union, which is really a targeted tweaking of the compulsory licensing provisions in the TRIPS agreement. And civil society broadly agrees that this won't go far enough, particularly for vaccines, where Article 39, the protection of undisclosed data, is a really major barrier to enabling the scaling up of manufacturing for vaccines, and the EU proposal doesn't touch on that. So there are other trade and health initiatives going on, as Roger covered very comprehensively in his presentation. Civil society concerns revolve around this WTO response to the pandemic, which is often referred to as the Walker process because it's being led by the New Zealand ambassador, David Walker. And it builds on the trade and health initiative proposed by the Ottawa group earlier in the year. So this focuses on export restrictions, which of course are really important. Regulatory alignment and collaboration around issues like customs, services and technical regulations, removing and reducing tariffs, increasing transparency and review of trade measures, and improving collaboration on efforts to expand production of medical goods. And while some of these measures have merit in my view, particularly the removal of export restrictions, the view amongst humanitarian and health civil society organisations is that these measures don't go to the heart of the matter, which is really the intellectual property barriers, which are so significant in terms of access to medicines and vaccines. Civil society is also concerned about the non-transparent, non-inclusive negotiating process that's happened around this WTO response to the pandemic, with many low and middle income countries feeling that they're not able to actively participate in that enough, and this sense that it's a distraction from the TRIPS waiver and the real issues. So finally, to wrap up, what developing countries can do in this environment with all of these circulating proposals and initiatives, I think that in the global forums, it's really important for low and middle income countries to build alliances, which is really important in terms of strengthening negotiating power and making sure that they're not excluded from the discussions and these proposals that often come from the wealthy countries and kind of clubs that, elite clubs of wealthy countries. Working really closely with civil society organisations is really important, I think. And regionally and domestically, it's important to build the capacity for development and manufacturing of health products towards pandemics, and also building that capacity around surveillance, notification and reporting, and capacity to respond to risks in pandemics. And regionally and domestically, also important to build the capacity for engagement in these global forums, including building stronger relationships between the trade and health sectors. And so I think that the work that you're doing in holding this conference, and also the book that you mentioned earlier on, is really important work for building that capacity and setting that stage for a better future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Associate Professor Deborah. I think she point out a very broad picture. But one thing for sure is that next week will be very critical for both WHO and WTO. So let's see what will happen. And that's, at the moment, there's a very lively movement prepare for the next week, particularly for the World Health Assembly special session. So let's see. We have talked about IHR, core capacity, but anyway, both WHO and WTO, they are intergovernmental organizations. So the role of non-state actor that proposed by the Deborah is very interesting, and it is very key to fill the gaps. For WTO, we have trip waiver, and then we have the mutual response to the pandemic. Whether or not it is extensive enough, effective enough, and quick enough to make change in practice in time, so that will be very challenging. But I like the most is the what low and middle income country can do. Three things that there are out. One is be at the table first. Otherwise, you will be on the table. So that is our commonly said idiom. But we have to be there and be connect and make alliance with other low-income country and with civil society. And then the last one is very important, to build our own capacity, because it is our own capacity which has the final say at the end of the day. Both uplink and downlink, that is our word. We often use here in Thailand. We mean uplink is that our engagement to supranational level, and downlink in terms of strengthen the surveillance, strengthen in terms of the technology transfer and manufacturing, that kind of thing. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any comment or any question, please feel free to put it on chat box. There's another chat box on Q&A. I've seen interesting question come in, and you can have a PowerPoint at the end. The organizer will organize this PowerPoint from the speaker, depending on the consent of the speaker. Okay, from Deborah, let's move to the third speaker, who is the real actor on the ground here in Thailand. My big brother, Dr. Nakhon Premsri. Dr. Nakhon Premsri is the Director for National Vaccine Institute, or NVI Thailand. He has vast experience, and I request the organizer to put Dr. Nakhon the short bio in the chat box, so we can cut short at the time. Dr. Nakhon, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dr. Taksapon, and thanks for your nice introduction of myself. And it is true that I'm the person who lying on the ground is truly lying on the ground during the work. So that's a joke that we have a very continuing and hard work during the crisis. And I would like to start because the topic is quite broad, and the point that I will focus will be on the global platform that two of speakers have touched.
Yep, you can see your slide.
So the slide is on, right? Okay.
Yes.
So I will start with first, when we talk about COVID-19 vaccine, I would say that this is very fast speed of vaccine development in the historical manner, because normally vaccine development would take 5 to 10 years. So that's the best case scenario that we have done so far. But for COVID-19 vaccine, it takes only 11 months from detecting of virus, decoding of the genome sequencing in January 2020, and then the first vaccine, the efficacious result was announced in November 2020. So that a historical work of the vaccine developer and the whole process of vaccine development. So one point of that Mr. Roger Kant talking about the national regulatory authority that could slow the process, or somebody said it's kind of it seems to be the barrier of vaccine development or even the pharmaceutical. But we need to bear in our mind that it's about the balancing between quality and the timeliness, and the National Regulatory Authority needs to ensure the quality of, especially in particular of vaccine, because vaccine we will use among the healthy person. So 11 months, and then the vaccine could be firstly used in December 2020. Again, it is very historical movement and very fast of vaccine development, I would say. So, but that's a good part of the vaccine development. And the other good side is about its effectiveness. So we can admit that vaccine has shown its effectiveness to prevent infection, prevent of severity, hospitalization, and deaths. So it's undoubtful on this kind of effect, and that's why it is in a high demand side of vaccine, and comparing to the supply side, which is very short. So that come to the point that because of the new movement, I would say the new model of R&D support in a kind of funding. So we have seen a number of advanced supply agreements among the high-income countries in the terms of R&D support that can accelerate vaccine development. So we have seen the supply agreement in advance between the EU and even the high-income country like the UK or Spain or Japan, or with the other, like the government, the US government, that even it seems like an order of vaccine, but it's in a kind of advanced agreement, and it will be on the risk that if vaccine development would be failed, so the budget or the money that has been utilized by the R&D would not be returned. So this is a kind of co-investment of high-income country with the vaccine developer in the picture or in the term of advanced supply agreement. So we have seen that the US government pledge of kind of 1.95 billion to deal with 100 million doses of vaccine. So, and then that's occurred in July 2020, which the vaccine has just been in the laboratory or in the animal testing. So this is a new model of funding mechanism. So I think this is one of the picture, but in the other side, it resulted in a kind of over secured of the doses among the high-income country, because the power of purchasing and the power of budget and the power of financing mechanism. So among those high-income country, I think by November or the beginning of December, the vaccine over 6,000 million doses has been advanced purchased since November 2020. Again, this is if just I as just I mentioned that the vaccine firstly announced of its efficacy result in November. But by November, the vaccine has been advanced, purchased by high-income country of over 6,000 million doses. So that the point that by the agreement between the vaccine developers, the vaccine manufacturers, and the government who support the R&D in the term of advanced purchase agreement. So this is the kind of binding term that they need to supply the vaccine to those countries and the first lot of vaccine available. While the supply of the vaccine was just a kind of gradually increased by the manufacturing expansion sites. So this the point that led to the result of this. So this is the information by November 23rd. And we have seen that 53.5% of world population have received at least one dose of vaccine. But when we look at the upper middle income country, high income country, and the world, and the lower middle income country and low income country, so we can see the inequity of vaccine distribution. And among 7.78 billion doses, so you see this is November 2021, and when by the last line, 6 billion doses have been secured in last November 2020, but by this November, it's only 7.78 billion doses that have been administered. So we can imagine that where the majority of vaccine doses will go to. And it is true that you can see the high coverage of vaccine among the high-income country and upper middle-income countries. And only 5.2% of people in low-income country have received at least one dose. So that's the picture. So when Dr. Taksapon, you mentioned regarding the solidarity, so this is a result that we need to see. This is an evidence what the kind of global community has been done so far on the solidarity. And this is a rate since I can say as well as among the low-income country. So, and I can touch a little bit on the COVAX facility. The COVAX facility initiated by a group of intergovernmental and the philanthropic funding like IHPP, WHO, Gavi, and UNICEF to kind of manage on the supply of vaccine and trying to put on a kind of equity distribution of vaccine to all of the country, especially for the lower and low-income country. So they define the AMC country, 92 countries that will get free vaccine supply. And the target of COVAX facility is to get the supply of vaccine at least 20% of the world population, or around 2,000 million doses or 2 billion doses of vaccine by the end of this year. But the real world is not like the concept. So even by this picture, the global supply forecasted, which was done in September, and this have shown that by November, it was forecasted or anticipated to have around 1,000 million doses of vaccine supplied to COVAX facility. So if you remember that last slide, that we mentioned that around of 7.7 billion doses have been distributed and supplied. So 1,000 among 7,000 million doses is only 1/7 of the vaccine supply. So that's why I mentioned this, like the vaccine mainly distributed through the bilateral agreement or advanced purchase agreement, and COVAX facility has got only 1/7 of the supply that to supply on to the participants, and that's the forecast, and this is the real world. That so far the COVAX has shipped 537 million doses, so around half of the target to the participant of 144 participants or countries. So it's less than 10% of the total vaccine doses that have been distributed to the countries in this world. Why it occur like this? So I think that there have been a number of analyses that I cannot get into the detail, but I would say that it's about the timeliness of the work. So when we work in the global picture, and when we put a number of factors like quality, transparency, participation, and all of the things in the good things, but it takes time. And then if COVAX can occur right away after the pandemic, so that would be good. But if COVAX, like this, the COVAX facility occurred after a number of doses has been secured through the advanced purchase agreement and bilateral agreement. So that's a picture that by the program, they have so limited supply to achieve the target that we aim for. So this is a point, and the other point is about the supply capability that which is mainly the COVAX facility relied on the facility at India in the major part of the program. So when there is a kind of exportation restriction of the manufacturing country, so the problem occurs to the global program like COVAX facility. So I would end by this slide that the benefit of advanced supply agreement, the positive side is to accelerate vaccine development, but it led to over-securing of vaccine among high-income countries. So we have seen a number of donation of vaccines, and as well as Mr. Roger mentioned on vaccine swapping, meaning that the high-income country right now, they have a kind of oversupply of vaccine, and number of doses has been donated to the developing countries, including Thailand. But again, it's come with the short shelf lives, and every country who receives the vaccine needs to manage in the urgency manner to utilize the doses of vaccine, which have a short shelf life. But again, this is a kind of contribution that we should acknowledge and appreciate the donation and the generosity of the country of origin that donate doses to country. But would like to receive the vaccine need to realize and need to manage the vaccine in a timely manner, something like that. So that's the good side of even the oversupply, but the donation occur in several millions of doses. So, but when the over securing and off advance supply agreement, it led to a compromising of the timeliness and vaccine distribution equity to lower income countries, as a picture that I showed to you. The global platform of like COVAX facility, because it's occurred slower than the bilateral agreement or the advanced purchase agreement. So it could not adequately perform its task, even its good concept and good design of global vaccine distribution equity. So what we've seen so far, so we should take this as a lesson learned if we face with the other pandemic. So we should have this kind of system or the global platform in a timely manner to prevent the things of inadequate supply of the global platform. I have seen the pricing mechanism which can be a lesson as well. We have seen the no profit, no loss pricing mechanism of one vaccine manufacturers. One price of vaccine, even low income or high income, they give one price of vaccine. Tier pricing of vaccine. And we also see the R&D support deducted price, like the EU group that the EU supported R&D costs in the advanced purchase agreement option. And then each country will buy the vaccine in a lower price. This is another pricing mechanism that I'm seeing and sees the benefit and the kind of initiative of pricing mechanism to increase the vaccine access in the global picture. There are the kind of several arguments between the vaccine self-reliance and vaccine nationalism or self-survival. I use this. I think it's major during the crisis when we say about the global or the what you have said, global solidarity. It's hard to practice because the tension and the pressure within the country is so high. And the self-survival sensation is also high as well. I can put the example of Thailand. That we, as you know, that we have a collaboration with AstraZeneca vaccine as a contract development and manufacturing organization, CDMO, one of vaccine manufacturer in Thailand, and we successfully established vaccine manufacturing capacity over here in Thailand in the level of more than 200 million doses per year of vaccine production, and the vaccine has been accepted at WHO EUL at this time. But during the peak of epidemic outbreak in Thailand, there was a kind of intense the community from the technical, from the doctors, from the organization that request of export restriction of vaccine that manufactured in Thailand in the way that need to serve the people within country first, then just export the remainder of vaccine to the others. So this is a picture that occurred during the crisis. So, but we I mean, we lucky enough that we did not implement the vaccine export restriction by pushing the other management to get more doses of vaccine by the other way around, not in the way of exportation restriction, so that we passed that period, and right now we have more than enough of vaccine to supply for the country. So self-reliance, nationalism, or self-survival, it's a kind of balancing an argument, and I think we can discuss in days and months relating to these issues. But come to the points that Dr. Deborah mentioned about the building up the capacity to be self-reliant. So I would say that for the developing country, we should aim for our self-reliance by building up the capacity of vaccine manufacturing. However, it's not quite easy. It is so challenging because vaccine manufacturing is not the simple process. Even by tricks, flexibility, or even by the kind of waiver of intellectual property, but vaccine manufacturing needs a very advanced and high technology, and it cannot be easily copy and paste like the others. So meaning that we need to build up the capacity, try to put on the international collaboration with the advanced manufacturing partner, and working together on building up the capacity within the country. And another important challenging point is about the maintaining of the capacity that we have built. Because during the crisis, we can build and we can get the funding to build up the capacity of manufacturing, but to maintain this capability and then survive and self-reliance until the next pandemic is so challenging. Let's say that if Thailand have a big vaccine manufacturing facility right now, but the pandemic is going to be subside or minimized, how can we maintain that capacity of 200 million doses of vaccine manufacturing during the normal situation, and to be maintained the capacity of the human resource, goodness of equipment, the quality of the work until the next pandemic? So that's the challenging. So it's not a one-time capacity building. It needs a long-term investment of human resource, infrastructure, and industrial manufacturing facility, and as well as the policy support from the government. So I will over to this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nakorn. That is great. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have question and comment, please raise your hand or put in chat. I will try to deliver it for you as well. So, Doctor, from Roger talk about the very lively situation in Geneva and in New York and in other at very top level. Deborah talked to us about the two key challenging battles at the moment from the WHO and the WTO, and how low middle income countries should prepare. Now, Dr. Nakorn bring us to the reality. In his, if you remember, his very first speaker talk about the dark green and the light green, show the inequity. Dr. Nakorn talk about inequity across country, but within country, the same society has also another type of inequity too. But Dr. Nakorn also talk about how to balance in 3 dimensions. So I try to the first one is between solidarity, national nationalism, if you can say, the rise of economic nationalism, and then self-reliance and self-survival. So that is one is not easy to say. We always say that no one is safe until everyone is safe, but it depends on where's the everyone. Is the everyone is someone around you in the country or someone else very far away? The second dimension for balance is about the conceptual and the reality. We're not going to talk about the COVAX. There's a lot of number of committed, but in reality, what is available for COVAX? So that is only the minimal in terms of the reality. And the third one is the execution. Even we can do many things, the execution capacity is the key in terms of timeliness. But we need not only hard science, or not only technology transfer, but we need also the soft side of it, trust and the public opinion. But Dr. Nakorn in quite similar and echo Deborah that we need strategic capacity building. And this is not one at a time, but it's more a plan. Okay, let's start for the Q&A. You can raise your hand. I have one Q&A waiting from Ajahn Nitat, but let me check if Ajahn Nitat can deliver by himself. Ajahn Nitat, can you deliver your question by yourself, or do you? I'm not sure. Okay, I can read. This is perhaps a very key and very practical issue as well. So I read it out first. COVID-19 pandemic situation is a good global case study, a very costly case study. It indicates that when there's a crisis or conflict between trade and health policy, health protection should be given priority over trade. Therefore, the language and tone of all FTAs should emphasize that health policy should be given priority over trade policy. Can we all agree on this? I may add, as moderator, I may add another question is that we often talk about that trade people and health people, we have different language. We have different terminology here and there, how to promote this coherent. Anyone would like to respond to Dr. Nitat question about priority and language? Roger, please. Perhaps you have to unmute your mic or can I say?
Yes, done.
Okay. Yeah.
I just wanted to give a few comments which are not answering the question because in a way, as you know, we are supposed to be neutral, and so I can't really say that there should be absolute priority of health over trade issues. But I think we should approach this question from a more pragmatic point of view, and the need to bring all these different dimensions together. So yes, we can have a and please take this as a very personal comment, we can have this rather sterile discussion in abstract about what is priority and what goes second. But what is more important is to bring all these, to pull the strings together and make them work together. And that I think is indeed something we need to look into, but maybe phrased in a different way. And of course, and there the participant raises a very good question. We have all these talks right now about what should be done at the multilateral level, be it WTO, be it WHO. But we tend to forget about the many obligations which are located in regional trade agreements and which have a direct impact on whatever we do at the WTO, whether there's a waiver or not. What does it mean? I mean, that doesn't mean anything in terms of regional trade agreements. Those obligations are on a standalone basis next to what is in the WTO. So I think that focus is rightly there. We need to, again, look into all of this in a holistic manner, not just focus on one level, which is multilateral. Thanks.
Thank you. Deborah, you want to add anything? Or Dr. Nakorn will go first.
Thank you. I think, we'd all agree probably that we would like to see a world where both health and economic goals are given, important weighting. I think that you know, in the messy reality of negotiating these types of things, there are a lot of power imbalances and vested interests that can kind of get in the way of achieving those goals. So it's not the path forward is not always very clear, but it's important that we keep working towards finding ways to make sure that we can achieve both our health, and sustainable development goals and our economic goals as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So we need some strike, some balance, and cover both. But we have a question specific to Deborah. So let chat to me. That is a little broken language, but I try to explain. On engagement of low and middle income country in the global forum, we see the improvement on IP issue. We see engagement of low and middle income countries on this movement. In your opinion, what else needs to be done to realize the TRIPS wave or to counterbalance to action to those few wealthy countries? So that is quite a challenging question to you.
That certainly is a very challenging question. I think a lot of the of what's useful is the alliances between low and middle income countries and the connections with civil society that can really help to help on the technical side, help in terms of applying pressure to countries that are holding out. We've seen in Australia the Australian government shifted from a position of opposing the TRIPS waiver to at least declaring its support for the TRIPS waiver recently. And many other countries have shifted their positions as well. And I think that a lot of that has to do with civil society raising the issue, drawing political attention to it, getting the issues into the media, and that has been quite important in shifting that balance. So I think hard to say what's going to make a difference in these critical days that lie ahead over the next week or so. I just saw today that there's been the launch of legal cases against some of the countries that are refusing to support the TRIPS waiver brought by human rights illegal groups. And I think that there's a lot of strategies being pursued to try and shift the positions of countries that are refusing to support it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Before we go to Dr. Nakorn about to strike any balance between trade and health and the reality, let's hear from Roger. You want to add on this point?
But I don't want to sideline Dr. Nakorn, so it was just a sort of direct addition to Deborah's comments, but I can go after, so as you like. Okay. The position can change, but the first thing to be cheap is perhaps the mindset. What is Dr. Nakorn's view on strike a balance between trade and health, promote this TRIPS wave, how to use the counterbalance this from few wealthy nation, and nationalism is not only wealthy country, so that is the reality. Okay, what is your view up?
So I think when we say balance, this is from a personal perspective. It cannot be balanced, but it's the kind of mutual cooperation between health and trade in the way of working, and I think we cannot find a balancing point, but we can try to work in a mutual way together on health and trade. And in some time, it's like a kind of fighting against each other between trade and health. But if we would like to kind of live in this world together, we need to find a way to mutually working on this. And for the health part, we also need the innovation like the drugs and vaccine. And by the innovation and development of drug and vaccine, it needs investment. And then when it needs investment, it needs funding or financing mechanism. So if it's not public supported, so when it comes to be the private or the company or the manufacturing owned funding support, so it will come to be trade. So if we can balance and we co-invest on the R&D development, like the way that we have so far on philanthropic funding mechanism, like I would say Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or IHPP, that will kind of compromising and then build a kind of mutual cooperation between private manufacturing and then working together. And then because this will be counted as public money, so by the trade, it will be less on the profit orientation, and then it will come closer to the public health orientation. So this is kind of what I would say on the kind of mutual cooperation between trade and health issue. So it's kind of when the pandemic occurred, we need a faster of development of both drug and vaccine to against of the disease, as well as diagnostic tool on this. And so this is a way that we need to build the platform of working between trade and health. And then I would not take side like emphasize on what points more than another point. Again, we should work in a kind of mutual cooperation manner on these things.
Thank you. Thank you. The next question is very challenging again and futuristic oriented. So I read the question and give our key speaker a few seconds to think about what kind of global mechanism that we need for the next. I understand it is the next pandemic or the next disease. So if you can help redesign the global governance structure, what kind of that would be? But to respond to Dr. Nakorn, is that actually we need people, my guru talked to me about three things. One is cooperate. Cooperate means we help each other. Coordinate. We communicate, we connect to each other, and we need collaborate. Collaborate is mean we and labor. And we're working together to the share goal and share the idea. And I believe that from this the session today, we have some share goal that without trade, health is nothing, and without health, trade is nothing as well. So this is not two totally separate area. And secondly is the capacity and preparedness at the country level is the key. So now come to the question, our futuristic question. What's the global governance for the next pandemic or something like that, a disease to come? If you can redesign from now, what it look like? Anyone would like to come first? Can I observe lady first? Deborah.
Thank you. I think it remains to be seen, and I think it will be very interesting to see whether countries, WHO members, agree to start negotiations on a pandemic treaty, and then if so, what sort of issues are put on the table and how far can that go in terms of being an instrument that helps to manage pandemics in future. But I think that, you know, the TRIPS waiver is really important. And even though that's initiatives focused on the here and now and getting COVID-19 products, you know, ramping up the global supply and achieving equity in terms of the distribution, I think that the success of that initiative will be really important in terms of setting the stage for what we do in future pandemics. So I think that that's an issue that really needs attention. And I guess, you know, in terms of the WTO, I think what really needs to happen is not so much a new set of rules, further liberalisation, you know, and a whole lot of collaboration that the WTO needs to drive, so much as the WTO essentially getting out of the way and agreeing, you know, to the waiver of key provisions in the TRIPS agreement, so that you know, we can actually free up the intellectual property. So I'd certainly be concerned if an outcome of the Ministerial Council meeting is a whole lot of new requirements in other areas, customs, trade facilitation, things like that, but not addressing this really key issue of temporarily waiving some of the existing trade rules.
Thank you very much.
I'm sure Roger will have different views.
Yep. I will leave Roger for the last one. Dr. Nakhon first, and then Roger.
Okay.
Your mic?
So,
okay.
Okay. So that's because the question is quite broad and take the whole thing when we say next. And everything needs to be better than the current one. So I would think about, because this is a way of epidemiologists, so we need to prepare for a kind of timely detection of the disease. This is for preparation. We need to talk to ourselves if this disease, I mean COVID-19, occur in the country where the capability of virus detection or highly advanced on genomic sequencing. So we may have a kind of slower detection of this kind of virus. And if the surveillance system is not strong enough, there will not be the people who detect or who notice the abnormal sign and symptom of the disease like this. So we need to think about this. How can we know this kind of disease? Because the people notice the abnormality of pneumonia in the different pattern and more severe cases, and in pneumonia among the adult with the other etiology, and by the advanced diagnostic that we can detect, and then the world can be alerted in a timely manner, and then we can respond. We can prepare ourselves. We have our time to prepare ourselves before the disease comes to us. But we need to think about if the disease occur in a remote area, but and then it's kind of gradually spreading, and then we don't know ourselves, and then it's kind of flag up in the multiple spot of this world.
It can get much worse.
Right, it will be much worse. And then this is first that we need a good surveillance system of the emerging infectious disease for the next pandemic. Second, we need a good response. I would say the response, it's about the policy making decision when we face with pandemic. We can imagine again, if by that time, the China government did not shut down the city. And then it's during the kind of Lunar New Year of Chinese New Year. And then the people will travel around the country and around the world as well. And then the disease would be spread very fast, and then no one can be prepared.
Okay.
Even the health system. So this is a kind of response.
Thank you.
That
Preparedness, capacity, strength of the
And the
system,
last-
swiftness, and effective. And the
Yeah.
last 30 seconds.
Sorry.
The last point is about the prevention. So like a detection, response, and prevention. So when we talk about the vaccine and manufacturing capacity, we need to right now to invest on strategically and geographically on building up the capacity of vaccine manufacturing, especially among the developing countries. And we see that as Thailand, we with a good and a proper technology transfer, we can develop ourselves the capacity to manufacture vaccine. And we see in Brazil as well, in Indonesia, in India, so we need to geographically and strategically locate the vaccine manufacturing, and again trying to build up and maintain it, secure it for the next pandemic. And then during the time we need to have a good R&D financing mechanism to support this kind of manufacturing capacity in the long term. So that's my point.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nakorn. And I was chaired by the organizer. Roger, you will be the first and the last speaker. Roger, please.
Yeah, I'll try to be very short. One comment on global governance structure. I think we've moved big steps in this direction, because I used to work in this area 15 years ago where it was really silos. Yeah, we are far away from this today. So I think it's not perfect. There's much more to be done. And yes, we need to look into the outcome of the pandemic treaty negotiations, if they are such, and in particular how these are sort of complementing what we have in terms of trade rules, because the risk is, I think, more confusion than synergies. So we need to make sure that whatever new instrument or framework is put in place, that this actually adds to what we have in terms of structures. I just wanted to give a word of comfort to Deborah. There's no intention whatsoever to impose new obligations on WTO members through the political declaration, which is under consideration. There's an explicit sort of paragraph in the preamble as drafted right now, which confirms this. So there's no I think members by and large agree that this shouldn't be the objective of this new declaration if it's agreed. And then just, I mean, I'm not supposed to take any position on the waiver discussion. What I would like to give you in 3 sentences is just 3 points of facts. One, when we discuss with manufacturers from developing countries and developed countries, they mention export restrictions, they mention regulatory issues, they hardly ever mention IP issues. Just as a fact. These developed countries today, and these are, I think, 42 members of the WTO, have a waiver in place which runs much longer than the one which is currently proposed. Until 2034, these developed countries are under no obligation in WTO in terms of patents and any intellectual property rights. And finally, I think we should bear in mind, and admittedly this is not in vaccines, but we need to bear in mind the really positive developments we've seen in the last couple of weeks in terms of the licenses which have been given to the medicines patent pool by Merck and Pfizer for therapeutics. But also what I think is a very good movement, because CTAP at the WHO has been sort of unused for more than a year, but we have seen the first license now given to CTAP, which includes not only technology transfer, but which is also of worldwide applications, so there's no territorial sort of limitation, and which runs as long as the patent is actually in place. So again, don't take this as any, advocating any particular position. I just think we need to bear these facts in mind when we discuss what is needed, and also to bear in mind a waiver is only a waiver of obligations under the WTO agreement. It does not waive any concrete intellectual property rights. That requires domestic implementation, and that requires the understanding and the capacity in the country concerned to do that. So I think that these are the framework issues we need to bear in mind when we discuss the waiver. And thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you. So that is very clear. We need to address it in comprehensively, dialogue, understanding, and share goal. So with that, thank you very much for our three keynote speaker, Roger, Deborah, and Dr. Khan. Thank you very much. Sorry, we run out of the time, so I return to organizer, please. Organizer.
Thank you.
ค่ะขอบพระคุณดร.นายแพทย์ทักษพลธรรมรังสีและวิทยากรทุกท่านเป็นอย่างสูงนะคะในขณะนี้ค่ะการประชุมวิชาการการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพประจำปี 2564 ก็ได้ดำเนินมาถึงช่วงสุดท้ายแล้วนะคะการประชุมในปีนี้ถูกจัดขึ้นภายใต้หัวข้อ Future International Trade and Health Post COVID-19 Pandemic ซึ่งมีการจัดประชุมทั้งสิ้น 3 ช่วงด้วยกันโดยช่วงที่ 1 Revisiting the International Trade and Health Aspect of COVID-19 เราได้พูดคุยกันถึงผลกระทบจากโควิดและนวัตกรรมการแก้ปัญหาใหม่ๆเช่น COVAX Medicine Patent Pool เป็นต้นนะคะซึ่งประเทศต่างๆในโลกรวมถึงประเทศไทยเองยังคงมีเรื่องท้าทายอีกมากรวมทั้งประเด็นในเรื่องการเข้าถึงยาและวัคซีนที่ทั่วถึงและเป็นธรรมในขณะที่ช่วงที่ 2 Making Vaccines, Medicines and Diagnostics Related to COVID-19 and Other Health Emergency Global Public Goods เราได้ร่วมรับฟังประเด็นที่น่าสนใจจากวิทยากรค่ะว่าจะทำอย่างไรให้วัคซีนและยากลายเป็นสินค้าสาธารณะและช่วงที่ 3 ที่เพิ่งจบลงไป New Global Governance of International Trade and Health เป็นการร่วมแลกเปลี่ยนเกี่ยวกับการปรับตัวขององค์กรต่างๆทั้งที่เกี่ยวข้องกับด้านการค้าและสุขภาพทั้งระดับนานาชาติและระดับชาตินะคะในช่วงสุดท้ายนี้ดิฉันขอเรียนเชิญดร.ชเอม พัชนีประธานอนุกรรมการจัดการประชุมวิชาการการค้าระหว่างประเทศและสุขภาพประจำปี 2564 สรุปประเด็นสำคัญและข้อเสนอแนะจากการประชุมขอเรียนเชิญค่ะ
ค่ะสวัสดีทุกท่านนะคะ Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. So I would like to spend a few minutes to summarize what we have discussed during the past three days and the highlight of what we got from the conference in terms of the recommendations for future action. I see that most of participants now are Thai, so I will speak in Thai, but the slides are in English. Let me share the screen.ค่ะจากหัวข้อของการประชุมในครั้งนี้นะคะที่พูดถึงเรื่องของการค้าระหว่างประเทศหลังจากวิกฤตโควิด -19 จะเป็นอย่างไรซึ่งในช่วง3วันที่ผ่านมาโดยเฉพาะ2วันแรกเราก็ได้พูดถึงความเกี่ยวโยงของโควิด -19 กับการค้าระหว่างประเทศนะคะก็จะเห็นว่าโควิด -19 เนี่ยมีผลกระทบต่อทางด้านสุขภาพต่อทางด้านการค้าในขณะเดียวกันก็มีประเด็นเรื่องของ geopolitics เข้ามาด้วยซึ่งจากที่เราได้อภิปรายกันมาทั้ง3วันนะคะก็จะเห็นว่าสถานการณ์สำคัญที่เกิดขึ้นเนี่ยก็มีหลายเรื่องโดยเฉพาะในเรื่องของประเด็นเรื่องของ intellectual properties นะคะถึงแม้ว่าจะมีการศึกษามีรูปแบบของ intellectual property เพิ่มขึ้นแต่ในขณะเดียวกันก็มีความตึงเครียดมี tension เพิ่มมากขึ้นด้วยเช่นเดียวกัน นอกจากนี้เราก็เห็นถึงความไม่เท่าเทียมความไม่บาลานซ์นะคะระหว่างดีมานด์กับ supply ก็ทำให้เกิดความเหลื่อมล้ำในการเข้าถึงยาวัคซีนเป็นต้นรวมถึงเรื่องของความไม่เป็นธรรมด้านสุขภาพอื่นๆเราจะเห็นจากประเด็นที่เกิดขึ้นนะคะอย่างเช่นวัคซีน nationalism หรือวัคซีน self reliance ซึ่งทำให้กระบวนการดำเนินการนะคะของภาคส่วนที่เกี่ยวข้องที่พยายามจะทำให้เกิดการเข้าถึงวัคซีนไม่สามารถดำเนินการได้อย่างเต็มที่ค่ะนอกจากนี้นะคะก็ได้เห็นว่าได้เห็นความจริงที่ว่ายังมี capacity gap ในหลายๆเรื่องโดยเฉพาะการที่จะนำผลที่ได้จากการวิจัยไปสู่การผลิตเป็นผลิตภัณฑ์อุตสาหกรรมอย่างแท้จริงค่ะสำหรับความท้าทายสำคัญที่เกิดขึ้นนะคะก็มีหลายประการด้วยเช่นเดียวกันอย่างเช่นเรื่องของความร่วมมือก็จะเห็นได้ว่าความร่วมมือได้มีการปรับเปลี่ยนไปนะคะจาก Multilateral Collaboration กลายไปเป็น Bilateral Collaboration มากขึ้นเพื่อที่จะหาทางให้เกิดความร่วมมือกันหรือว่าดำเนินการในบางเรื่องได้เร็วขึ้นนะคะซึ่งก็จะทำให้บางประเทศได้ถูก left out จากการดำเนินการดังกล่าวนอกจากนี้นะคะก็จะเห็นว่ากระบวนการดำเนินงานของ global platform ทั้งหลายที่เกิดขึ้นนะคะอย่างเช่น medicine patent pool หรือว่า COVAX ก็ไม่ได้สามารถดำเนินการได้อย่างมีประสิทธิภาพเท่าที่ควรดังที่เราได้ฟังรายละเอียดจากที่ท่านวิทยากรแล้วก็ท่านผู้ฟังได้อภิปรายกันนะคะและประเด็นสำคัญอีกประเด็นหนึ่งก็คือความเป็นไปได้ในการที่จะถูกฟ้องร้องในส่วนที่เกี่ยวข้องนะคะโดยเฉพาะเรื่องของ Investor State Dispute Settlement ค่ะที่สำคัญประการหนึ่งนะคะก็คือว่ายังมีความท้าทายในเรื่องของการที่จะ revitalize global trade global economy ในขณะเดียวกันก็คือเรื่องของการ transfer technology หรือว่า know how เพื่อให้ประเทศต่างๆสามารถที่จะมี capacity ในการผลิตยาหรือวัคซีนที่เกี่ยวข้องได้ค่ะมาดูในเรื่องของ global response กันนะคะว่ามีอะไรบ้างวันนี้นะคะเราก็ได้ฟังจากมิสเตอร์โรเจอร์แคมป์ที่พูดถึงเรื่องของ high level response หรือว่า engagement ของผู้นำองค์กรระดับโลกทั้งหลายที่มีความร่วมมือกันซึ่งก็เป็นความร่วมมือที่มีความเกี่ยวข้องกับผู้นำแล้วก็เป็นสิ่งที่เราอาจจะไม่ได้เห็นมาก่อนนะคะถึง commitment ของผู้นำทั้งหลายเหล่านี้และนอกจากนี้ก็ยังมี initiative มีข้อริเริ่มต่างๆในระดับโลกมากมายซึ่งเราก็ได้ยินมาไม่ว่าจะเป็นเรื่องของ ACT Accelerator โดยองค์การอนามัยโลกหรือว่า COVAX ซึ่งดำเนินการในเรื่องของการผลิตแล้วก็จัดหาวัคซีนเป็นต้นค่ะในขณะเดียวกันณขณะนี้ก็มีการหารือถึงเรื่องความเป็นไปได้ที่จะมี international instrument ฉบับใหม่เพื่อที่จะรับมือกับการแพร่ระบาดของโรครวมถึงสถานการณ์สาธารณสุขฉุกเฉินที่จะเกิดขึ้นในอนาคตนะคะแล้วก็รวมถึง funding mechanism ใหม่ๆที่มีประเทศหลายๆประเทศได้พัฒนาแล้วก็หารือกันเพื่อที่จะพัฒนาขึ้นมาค่ะนอกจากนี้เราก็ได้ยินหลายครั้งนะคะพูดถึงเรื่องของ IP ในส่วนของ Trip Waiver ซึ่งมีหลายประเทศได้เรียกร้องให้เกิดขึ้นแล้วก็มีการนำเสนอไปสู่Trip Council ภายใต้ WTO นะคะแต่ทั้งนี้ทั้งนั้นก็ยังมีบางประเทศที่ยังไม่เห็นด้วยก็จึงทำให้ยังไม่สามารถดำเนินการได้สำเร็จแล้วก็ยังมีเมคานิซึมอื่นๆที่เกิดขึ้นอีกมากมายค่ะตรงนี้ก็คือเป็นการยกตัวอย่างให้เห็นนะคะว่าสิ่งที่เกิดขึ้นเพื่อที่จะรับมือกับโควิด -19 ในระดับโลกแล้วก็ระดับภูมิภาคระดับประเทศมีอะไรบ้างมาดูในส่วนของ recommendation นะคะในส่วนของ recommendation ที่ได้จากทั้ง3วันนี้ค่ะอาจจะยังไม่ครบถ้วนเนื่องจากว่าเรารีบทำเพื่อให้ทันกับการสรุปในช่วงเวลานี้ recommendation สำคัญนะคะอันแรกก็คือเรื่องของการ build back better ทางด้าน trade and health capacity นะคะในการที่จะรับมือกับpublic health emergency ทั้งในปัจจุบันและอนาคตอันแรกก็พูดถึงเรื่องของการใช้โอกาสนี้นะคะในการ improve health related regulations ในระดับประเทศเป็นต้นค่ะรวมถึงความร่วมมือในระดับ ทวิภาคีในระดับพหุภาคีนะคะไม่ว่าจะเป็นระหว่างภาครัฐกับภาคเอกชนหรือว่าโดยองค์กรระหว่างประเทศที่เกี่ยวข้องเพื่อที่จะให้เกิดความร่วมมือกันในการเพิ่มการพัฒนาหรือว่าการเข้าถึงยาแล้วก็วัคซีนที่เกี่ยวข้องค่ะนอกจากนี้นะคะยังได้พูดถึงการที่จะปรับบทบาทของ regulator ให้กลายเป็น facilitator ในบริบทนี้ด้วยที่สำคัญก็คือเรื่องของ capacity building นะคะรวมถึงสกิลของ human resources ที่เกี่ยวข้องในกระบวนการการผลิตหรือว่าใน global value chain ของการผลิตที่เกี่ยวข้องกับทางการแพทย์ด้วยเช่นเดียวกันค่ะนอกจากนี้ capacity building ที่สำคัญอีก2ประการก็คือ capacity building ในเรื่องของการผลิตการพัฒนาและตามที่อาจารย์เดโบราได้พูดไว้นะคะก็คือ capacity building ของประเทศกำลังพัฒนาในการที่จะมีบทบาทหรือว่ามี engagement ใน global forum ค่ะนอกจากนี้นะคะก็พูดถึงเรื่องของการเพิ่มขีดความสามารถการ strengthen global governance ของ trade and health ในรูปแบบของ multi-sectoral collaboration แล้วก็ในรูปแบบของการ reform mechanism ที่มีอยู่นะคะเพื่อให้สามารถresponsive หรือว่าสามารถรับมือกับ public health emergency ได้อย่างดีขึ้นทีนี้คำถามที่เราถามในการประชุมครั้งนี้ก็คือว่าfuture international trade and health หลังโควิด -19 จะเป็นอย่างไรจากที่ฟังมาทั้ง3วันนะคะเราก็พบว่าก็คงจะต้องใช้เวลาในระยะเวลาหนึ่งนะคะในการที่จะให้โลกนี้ค่ะได้ปรับตัวจากสถานการณ์การแพร่ระบาดของโควิด -19 ซึ่งเราก็ได้ประสบปัญหาและสถานการณ์นี้มาเป็นเวลา2 ปีแล้วและจากสถานการณ์ที่เกิดขึ้นก็พบว่าเทคโนโลยี disruption เนี่ยค่ะก็จะถูกใช้มากขึ้นนะคะเพื่อที่จะใช้ในการที่จะปรับเรื่องของ trade and health ใน new context นะคะโดยเฉพาะในเรื่องของวัคซีน development เรื่องของ medical product ที่เกี่ยวข้องแต่ทั้งนี้ทั้งนั้นก็ยังมีประเด็นท้าทายอยู่อีกหลายประเด็นโดยเฉพาะในเรื่องของ IP แล้วก็เรื่องของ access to medicine ซึ่งทั้ง2เรื่องนี้ค่ะก็เหมือนเป็นสิ่งที่เป็นคู่ขนานกันนะคะยังไม่สามารถที่จะมาดำเนินการเพื่อให้ไปด้วยกันได้ค่ะนอกจากนี้เรื่องของการที่ให้มีความร่วมมือหรือว่ามี participation จากองค์กรที่เป็น non-state actor มากขึ้นก็เป็นเรื่องสำคัญแล้วก็คิดว่าในอนาคตของ international trade and health governance เนี่ยค่ะก็คงจะมีความมี participation ของ non-state actor มากขึ้นนะคะนอกจากนี้นะคะก็ความเกี่ยวเนื่องความเกี่ยวโยงหรือว่า interconnectedness ระหว่าง trade and health เนี่ยค่ะก็จำเป็นที่จะต้องใช้ความร่วมมือในเชิงของ constructive collaboration มากขึ้นเพราะจากที่เราเห็นตัวอย่างมาก็เห็นว่าการที่ร่วมมือกันเป็นสิ่งสำคัญแล้วก็ประเด็นสำคัญอีกอันหนึ่งซึ่งยังเป็นประเด็นท้าทายอยู่ก็คือในเรื่องของ trade and health policy coherence ค่ะจะเป็นอย่างไรต่อไปอันนี้ก็คงจะต้องขึ้นอยู่กับว่าสถานการณ์จะเป็นอย่างไรแล้วก็ที่สำคัญนะคะณขณะนี้หลายภาคส่วนก็พยายามดำเนินงานเพื่อที่จะให้การรับมือกับโควิด -19 เนี่ยค่ะเป็นไปได้ด้วยดีแล้วก็การใช้เครื่องมือทางด้านการค้าเพื่อรับมือกับการแพร่ระบาดของโรคก็เป็นเรื่องที่ดำเนินการอยู่ในขณะเดียวกันก็ยังมีอุปสรรคปัญหาอยู่นะคะก็เป็นเรื่องที่ต้องดำเนินการต่อไปว่า Trade and Health Policy Coherence เนี่ยค่ะควรจะมีกลไกหรือว่ามีการดำเนินการอย่างไรเพื่อให้ประสบความสำเร็จเพื่อที่จะสามารถปกป้องสุขภาพของประชาชนในขณะเดียวกันเศรษฐกิจแล้วก็การค้าระหว่างประเทศก็ไม่ได้รับผลกระทบมากเกินไปค่ะแล้วก็ท้ายที่สุดนี้นะคะในนามของผู้จัดการประชุมon behalf of the conference organizers, I would like to thank all the speakers who spent time to share your experience, your thoughts with us during the past 3 days. And thanks the participants who have been with us through this virtual platform. And also thanks to the team of the note takers who have been working hard during the past 3 days to take note to summarize the key points. and we look forward to future exchange with you and hopefully to see you again in our future event. Thank you very much. สวัสดีค่ะ
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah. Thank you very much and good night. Yeah.